This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Habayim. It's amazing, even though we're in the 3 weeks now, it's amazing how many Italian Gedolim are relevant to the Tekufa of the year that we're happen to be in. Of course, we know Minhag Ashkenaz is we don't shave or take haircuts throughout the period of the Bein HaMetzarim. And this brings us to the important topic of beards. Should a Jew have a beard? Is a beard a Jewish look? Is it an obligation? Is it a preference? Is it a minhag? Or is it discretionary? Or is it really not that important at all? Well, one of the fiercest disputes in Jewish history was the raging machlokes between Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Of course, we know that not only was it a machlokes between those two great Gedolei Yisrael, but there were many Rabbanim involved on both sides. But one thing they both agreed on was they both agreed on the greatness of the individual we're going to speak about tonight, and that is the Rama MiPano, Rabbeinu Menachem Azariah of Pano. Somebody even was afraid, Rabbi, you speak about the Rama MiPano so much, he may even be surpassing the Chidah in terms of your personal popularity. So I just want to assure you that the Chidah appears on the Mar Mekomos tonight at least 5 times. So I don't think, it might be a tight race, but certainly, Kulam Ahuvim, they're all very beloved. Okay, so Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz wrote a Sefer on Choshen Mishpat called Kreisi Uplesi, which is a very complex Sefer. And in the Kreisi Uplesi, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz wrote a chelek of it called Beis HaSafek. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz discusses a very interesting topic, something maybe you'll remember back to your yeshiva days, if you ever had the privilege to learn Masechta Ksubos, on Daf Tes in Masechta Ksubos, the Gemara talks about the following dilemma. A person gets married, and he realizes the woman is not a basula. She's not as advertised. Now the problem is, if she was mezaneh while she was married to you, in other words, after Erusin, then you're not to live with her. So the Gemara says, if somebody married a woman, umatza pesach pasuach, he found that she's not a basula, he's allowed to continue living with her based on the heter called svek sveka. What's the svek sveka? We know safek d'oraisa l'chumra. If you're in doubt whether you're permitted or prohibited to do something, when it comes to an isser d'oraisa, it's asr. So one would expect, since you're not sure if this one woman was mazana while she was married to you, you would expect that she in fact is asr to you. But no, the Gemara says she is mutter to you because of svek sveka. Listen carefully. What's the svek sveka? Maybe she was mazana when she was married to you, maybe it was before. And even if she was mazana when she was married to you, maybe it was ba'oines. Maybe she was coerced and it wasn't out of her own volition. And if a woman is mazana ba'oines, a woman was coerced, then she's muteres labala, she's mutter to her husband. So it's a svek sveka. Maybe tachtav, maybe lav tachtav, and even if it was tachtav, maybe ba'oines, maybe baratzin. So the question is, whenever you use a heter of a svek sveka, does the svek sveka have to be mishapeches? You ever hear that concept? Mishapeches means you have 2 possibilities why something should be mutter. Either A, and even if not A, maybe B. Do you need to be able to say over the svek sveka, maybe A, and even if not A, B? And do you need to be able to say it the other way also? Maybe B, and even if not B, maybe A. Do you have to be able to say it over both ways? For example, the classic case, maybe it was tachtav, maybe it was lav tachtav, and even if it was tachtav, maybe ba'oines, or maybe baratzin. You could say it the other way as well. Was it oines, and was it ratzin? Or even if it was ratzin, maybe it was lav tachtav. That's what it means, a svek sveka to be mishapeches. So there is the opinion of the Rivash, who testifies and attests in the name of the Kadmonim that it does have to be mishapech. When you utilize the heter of svek sveka, you have to be able to say it both ways. On the other hand, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, the opinion of the Maharit, he brings slew of rayos from Chasam Poskim, that a svek sveka does not have to be mishapeches. Even if you can only say it one way, it's still a valid svek sveka. And the Pri Chadash as well also brings many rayos that a svek sveka does not have to be mishapeches. comes the Rama MiPano, Rabbi MiPano, who, by the way, was not only one of the greatest Mekubalim, but he was a great halachist. He wrote on the Rif. He wrote a Kitzur of the Rif. We know in the back of every Gemara you have the abridged version of the. You have the Rif. The Rif basically collects from the Gemara all the halachas psukos. The Rama MiPano abridged the Rif in a sefer called Alfasi Zuta. Alfasi Zuta. The Rama MiPano says what says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Harav Hagadol Hakadosh VeHatahar Rabbeinu Menachem Azariah. The great, holy, pure Rabbi Menachem Azariah, the author of Asara Ma'amoros. You know what he is? Quoting the pasuk in Koheles, he's a Chacham Yoidea Peshar Davar. You know what that means? A wise man always makes compromise. One extreme view is this way, another extreme view is that way. The wise man knows how to sort of take the opinions of both and fuse them together to form a reasonable approach. So the Rama MiPano says like this: do we say like the Rivash that Seksveka has to be misapeches, or do we say like the Marit that it doesn't? The Rama MiPano says as follows: that if both Sveikos, there's really no reason to say one suffix before the other, then in fact, then the Seksveka needs to be able to be misapeches. In other words, if reasonably, there's no reason to analyze one suffix before the other, and each one reasonably you could look at first, then taka, you need to be able to say it both ways. But if there's a logic that, you know what, it's more reasonable to declare one shaila before the other, then even if the Seksveka is not misapeches, it's okay. Because anyway, it's not reasonable to take it from that side. It's not reasonable to start in that way. That's the opinion of the Rama MiPano. I only bring this in just to see the language of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He calls the Rama MiPano the Rav Hagadol Hakadosh VeHatahar. Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote Tshuvos, Siman Lamed Gimel. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was not one to mince words. He was not one to offer free compliments. If there was any minute deviation in somebody, he'll let you know. Rabbi Yaakov Emden speaks about the Rama MiPano in unbelievably glowing terms. And the same way Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi compliments Rama MiPano, that he was able to always to make a pshara between the different views of the Chachamim, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in a completely different subject, he's discussing the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. There are all kinds of controversies about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, because on the one hand we know he died mincha time on Shabbos. On the other hand, Chazal say he wrote many Sifrei Torah on the day of his Misa. Well, if it was Shabbos, how could he possibly have written Sifrei Torah? There are many different views. The Rama MiPano also says, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, on the second line, Rama MiPano, Chachmas Elokim B'kirba, he had the wisdom of God. Lasos Mishma, to make judgment. What is the judgment? Zu Pshara Lasam Shalom Bein Tamei Chachamim Hamar B'Moisai. He would always find the compromised view. His words, Maskul Ma'id L'chiki, his words are so sweet to my palate. He would say, and he would be able to fuse together all the various views. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Hamoilech B'Chachmas HaEmes. You ever hear, you say about different people, he was the king, right? Well, the real king, the king of Kabbalah, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, was the Rama MiPano. He says, Mi b'chol beis ha-zohar kamayu. Who had mastery of the Zohar like him? We accept his words. He says his words are tzadku yachdav. Ein bohem niftav ve'ikesh. There's nothing crooked about it. There's no straw. There's no refuse. There's no kash. It's soiles nakia menufa v'yigamo nafais. It is cleansed and purified and sifted flour. And then the Rabbi Yaakov Emden ends off, Diyalide imei krama taled. He gives a brach, any woman who gives birth should give birth the likes of someone like the Rama MiPano. So just let me tell you a little bit more about the background of the Rama MiPano, so that you realize that one observation we're going to make, how startling it actually is. Well, if there's one thing you've been learning over the last couple of weeks, is that if you want to know any information about a Gadol B'Yisrael, where do you look? The Chida, in which Sefer? in the Shem HaGedolim. Right? The Chida wrote a work of bibliographic wonder. The Chida writes about the Rama MiPano, that the Rama MiPano, by the way, in what kufa did he live? During what era did he live? He lived during the era of the Beis Yosef, Maran Bet Yosef. He lived in the era of the Beis Yosef. And as we're going to see, amazing thing, here the Beis Yosef is living in Eretz Yisrael. The printing press had not made its way to Eretz Yisrael yet. All the the source of all printing in the world, the hub of printing in the world was Italy. The Beis Yosef sent the folios of the Kesef Mishnah. He entrusted it to the Rama MiPano, who, by the way, Rama MiPano was a very wealthy man. Rama MiPano had a big Yerusha. He lived in a giant palace. However, he did not spend time in any room in that house other than a shack, broken down room, which that is where he spent his entire life. So he lived in great pomp and ceremony, but he didn't actually live in it. Very unusual. He had one room, like a shack, like a cave. He spent his whole life in there. In fact, we have a tradition, it's brought down in the Sofer Irgaz HaBoisem, that the Rama MiPano, he would contemplate and meditate, and he had a real fear that his neshama would go up to Shamayim. So he told the shamish every day to come knock on the door to sort of, get him to snap out of it, so he wouldn't leave this world. And there was a fire, the shamish was late, and he came back, and the Rama MiPano was no longer. So he died, misas nashika. So he died, he lived in the era of the Beis Yosef. And the Chida brings down, he heard from Mahari Lumbruzi. So the Mahari Lumbruzi was present, and he overheard that the Rama MiPano was learning with a Maggid. Okay, so the Rama MiPano had a Malach who came to learn with him. The Rama MiPano wrote many, many Sfarim. I'll just name a couple. Many of them are small contrasim. So he wrote something called Asara Mamoros. He wrote something called Eim Kol Chai. In fact, Maimer Chikor Hadin, the Shach on Yoredeya actually quotes Rama MiPano, Maimer Eim Kol Chai. He wrote a sefer called Maimer Ho'itim. Right? If you look in Koheles it talks about the different zmanim. Right? Eis Lehoy, Eis Lesnoi, Eis, the different zmanim, 28 zmanim. The Rama MiPano wrote Mamorim on all these various zmanim. He wrote something called Maimer Tzivas Hashem. He wrote many, many svarim. He wrote a sefer Yemin Hashem Roi Meima about the correct way to be makif the bima with the lulav and esrog, and that was a very controversial work. There was someone in the name of Mahari Samiga who wrote a contrary sefer. The name of that sefer was Derech Yemin. Rama MiPano, the Chasam Sofer refers to him as Avi HaMekubalim, the father of all Mekubalim. I want to tell you one more amazing thing. The Rama MiPano began his career learning one style of Kabbalah, and he ended off learning a different style. If you remember back to Lag BaOmer, does anybody remember who was the Rebbe of the Rama MiPano? Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was a direct Talmud of the Arizal. And we explained how's that possible. How's that? The Arizal warned very sternly that nobody could disseminate his Kabbalah other than Reb Chaim Vital. And here the Rama MiPano is learning from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, so we learned that Rabbi Yisrael Saruk actually preceded Reb Chaim Vital to learn from the Arizal. So he was sort of grandfathered in before the admonition of the Ari. The Ramak is considered a lower level of Kabbalah than the Kabbalah Arizal. In fact, the Vilna Gaon says like this. Vilna Gaon says, where philosophy ends, Kabbalah begins. Where the Kabbalah of the Ramak ends, the Kabbalah of the Arizal begins. In fact, the Ramak from the Olam HaEmes, I believe he said that in Shamayim both Kabbalahs are true, but they learn Al-Pi the Kabbalah Arizal and Shamayim. Be it as it may, the Rama MiPano did not have exposure to either brand of Kabbalah. He heard there was a great tzaddik in Eretz Yisrael by the name of Ramak, Ramosha Cordovero, and the Ramosha Cordovero actually sent the Rama MiPano many of his Sfarim. So that was the first exposure the Rama MiPano had to the Sfarim of Ramosha Cordovero. He sent him specifically some of the Ksavim of the Ramak, but the Chida brings down a very detailed report, and that is that Rav Emmanuel, now who's Rav Emmanuel? Who's Rav Emmanuel MiPano? Who's Rav Emmanuel MiPano? The answer is, that was his English name, not his secular name. The Menachem in Italian is Mani, Emmanuel. His Italian name was Manuel. So it was recorded as follows. The greatest work of the Ramak is called Or Yakar. Or Yakar is a 16-volume major, each work is a major edition, 16 volumes on the Zohar, the Raya Mehemna, all the Idros. Well, when the Ramak died, the Rami Pano was chalashing to get a hold of these manuscripts. So he needed to bribe to get the manuscripts. He didn't want to buy them. The Almana would never give it up. He sent 1,000 ducats to Eretz Yisrael, to the Almana, just for her to release the manuscripts for him to borrow and copy over. Apparently she wasn't willing to release it, so the Rami Pano had to pay off some of the Gedolim of the time to intercede on his behalf. So we actually have a record. She paid 20 golden coins to Rav Yosef Karoi, the Mechaber, to convince the Almana of the Ramak to give up the manuscripts. She had to pay off the Alshich 10 golden coins. Somebody asked me, why did the Beis Yosef charge more? First, I don't know, maybe, he was, the Malach didn't let him, he was in charge of, but all, different speakers charge different amounts. I don't know, that's... Anyway, we have a detailed account how much money the Rami Pano has sent different Gedolei Yisrael to intercede on his behalf. Okay, so here we're dealing with one of the all-time great Mekubalim, and the last thing in the world you would expect is to hear the following. Comes the Shas Chuvas Chasam Sofer, and the Chasam Sofer was posed with the following question: does a Jew have to have a beard? After all, the Mekubalim write very clearly, Loi lahoishid yadav bedikni klal. Do not send forth your hand to the beard at all. And the Chasam Sofer in Pressburg, where you have to know in Pressburg, the Yidden were all shaving. Contrary to what most people think, everybody was shaving over there. It was, people shaved. No, not with a razor. But they had different ways. However they did it, by hook or by crook. Not by crook, more like by hook. They were clean shaven. And the Chasam Sofer was asked, what about the Kabbalah that says, don't touch the beard? Says the Chasam Sofer, what do you want from me? Ainli Asik ben Astaros. Am I a Kabbalist? I have no business with hidden mysteries. But, says the Chasam Sofer, I want you to know something. If you think that al pi Kabbalah you have to have a beard, you should know that obviously in Italy they didn't care too much about this Kabbalah. She'bechol Eretz Italia kol chachameha megul chezakein. Every last rabbi in Italy was clean shaven. And you say, what? The Ramchal, Rabbi Shai Basson, this one, that one? You heard the man. Every last rabbi in Italy did not have a beard. How's that possible? So let me tell you that's possible. V'nitlim be'ilan gadol Rav Menachem Azariah. And they blamed it on the greatest Italian rabbi, the Rami Pano. Avi HaMekubalim, the chief Kabbalist. Shehu hayam megaleach mebli hisher sara echad. You know how well he shaved? He didn't even miss one hair. He's not like the guy who shaves and has like those two hairs sticking out over here. He did not even miss one hair. Says Chasam Sofer, how do I know? V'chein heirolav hayashar mikandaya. The great philosopher, the Yashar from Kandaya, testified in his Sefer Elim. And he would say as follows, that al pi Kabbalah in Chutz La'aretz, you should not have a beard. Sounds good, huh? You hear this? The Chasam Sofer is quoting the Yashar Mikandaya, who, by the way, the Chida writes, was a great philosopher, was a great Chacham, was well knowledgeable in every discipline, in analytics, in refuah, in medicine, in every type of discipline. He was a great speaker. He wrote many works. He wrote a Sefer Elim, by the way. he also wrote a work against Kabbalah, which the Ramaz disproved. Now, I just want to remind you, anybody remember who's the Ramaz? Rav Moshe Zakuto. Now, if you go to Manitoba today, there's a big army base which stands on the cemetery in Manitoba, and on the outside of the army base there's a sign, here is buried Rami Pano and Rav Moshe Zakuto. Who's Rav Moshe Zakuto? Let me just remind you. The Ramchal's Rebbe, who remembers? Who's the Ramchal's Rebbe? Rabbi Shaya Bason. Very good, Ruvain. Rabbi Shaya Bason. And who's Rabbi Shaya Bason's Rebbe? Rav Moshe Zakuto. Rabbi Shaya Bason's father-in-law is Rabbi Binyamin Cohen. Rav Moshe Zakuto's Rebbe was Rabbi Azariah Figo. Rabbi Azariah Figo's Rebbe was Rabbi Yehuda of Modena, who we spoke about. So if you want to know the chain, Rabbi Yehuda Modena, Rabbi Azariah Figo, Rabbi Moshe Zakuto, Rabbi Shaya Bason, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzat. And they all cannot be more different one from the next.
They all had no beard.
And according to the Chasam Sofer, they all had a very smooth face. Well, says the Chasam Sofer, Al Pi Kabbalah, he quotes, you shouldn't have a beard in Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, Chasam Sofer explains, let me tell you something. Where did it come from that nowadays so many Jews don't have beards? After all, in the Midbar, one thing I could assure you, they all had beards. And when they entered Eretz Yisrael, they all had beards. And then when they went down to Bavel, they all had beards. And when they came back to Eretz Yisrael, they still had their beards. When did it happen that Jews stopped wearing the beard? Well, it says the Chasam Sofer, let me tell you how it happened. It happened in the year Tatnu. Okay, remember that for Tisha B'Av. Tatnu is the year Taf Nun Vav. Taf Nun Vav is the year 1096, the year of the Crusades. Gezeras Tatnu is a reference in literature, in literature of Shalas Tshuvos or of Old Sfarim, where the reference to the Crusades are the Gezeras Tatnu. During the Gezeras Tatnu, the Jews were on the run. Now, you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. If every guy is, smooth face, lift and cut, and the Jew has a langa bird, the guy's going to say, no, he can take off his yarmulke. Say, Rabbi, you're a dead man. Me? Who are you talking about? I mean not the Yid. So they had to shave to disguise themselves. Now, the question asks the Chasam Sofer, but why did Goyim not have beards? Like, going back in the day, even Goyim had beards. Says the Chasam Sofer, now I don't get this exact cheshbon, but he says what happened was, in Poland, there was a king. The king was impotent. Couldn't have children, couldn't produce hair. So he was clean shaven. And as not to embarrass this king, the Goyim all began to shave. That's where it came from. Had this guy been a real man, all Goyim would look like,
You got him in Poland?
In Poland, yeah. But it all started from this Polish king who was not able to produce hair. Actually, Chasam Sofer in Parshas Vaschanan quotes this from a great historian, the Tzemach David, with David Gans, who was the Talmud of the Rama. In any event, in order to masquerade as a guy, it became Jewish custom to shave the beard. Says Chasam Sofer, except for the rabbis. The rabbis, anyway, they would sit in the house all day, so they didn't have to hide themselves. But every other Yid, says Chasam Sofer, we're going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The Chachamim were mater Yidden to remove their beards. That's a fact. Says Chasam Sofer, sir, if you're going to say that not having a beard is even a small chait, chas v'shalom, to say such a thing. Says Chasam Sofer, anyone who says that there's any avero whatsoever not to have a beard, osid litein hadin, God will take them to task. Some Sofer says very harsh words about people who overemphasize the importance of the beard. In other words, you want to have a beard? No problem. You want to look more like the old-time Jews? Gavaldik, wonderful. But you're going to tell somebody, you you're not a good enough Jew because you don't have a beard, says Chasam Sofer, Asid Litain Es Hadin. Chasam Sofer? Oh boy, did he have a beard. Of course he had a beard. No question. All the Rabbanim in Europe had a beard except for Italy. Italy was different. Italy was more a Renaissance country. It was more advanced. Many of the Gedolim there went to university. Almost all the Gedolim there went to university. Padua, many of them were physicians. Many of them were Karev Lamalchus. So they had to, for example, if I'm not mistaken, one of the head of the Agudas Yisrael of the last generation, also I believe Rav Aaron Cutler told him not to have a beard. He's among the high-ranking officials, presidents. He mixes in high company. It would be uncomfortable. It would not be dignified. In the Gentile world, a beard today is considered messy. For right or for wrong. So there was another Italian gadol by the name of Reb Shamshin Morporgo. He was the Rav of Ancona. Reb Shamshin Morporgo was asked the following question. Many Italian Jews made their way to Salonika. Where's Salonika? In Greece. In Greece they were very frum. In Greece the rabbis wanted to be geyser that anybody who doesn't have a beard either shall leave our country, or we'll put them in cherem, or we declare that they're no longer Jewish. They really held their beards over there. You hear this? In Salonika, they made the Rabbanim got together to try to enforce. They didn't like the fact that these Italian Yidden were coming in, and they look modern. They don't look like Jews. And Reb Shamshin Purgo was asked to comment on whether the Chachamim Salonika have the right to do this. And he said, of course not. They don't have the right to do this. Could somebody please show me where in the Chumash or the Shas does it say that you have to have a beard? It doesn't say it anywhere. All we know is it's a Mishnah Makos. The Mishnah says you can't shave with a razor, but if you shave with you could shave with the scissors. You could cut your beard with scissors. So therefore, he was not for this ban in Salonika. Well, where did the Chasam Sofer get this from? First of all, Chasam Sofer is saying that the Rabbanim in Italy did not have beards. He's saying that the reason they don't have beards is they blame it on the Rama MiPano. In other words, they're following the example of the Rama MiPano. And where did the Chasam Sofer get this from? So we have a very unusual tshuva. Please look at number 10. Shailas Utshuvas Be'er Asek. Shailas Utshuvas Be'er Asek was written by Rabbeinu Moshe Shabsi Be'er. And he was asked by one of his Talmidim, based on the Zohar. The Zohar says on the pasuk, Am Zu Yatzar Tali. What's the gematria of Zu? Zu is 13. And there's a concept, al pi Kabbalah, that the beard represents the Yud Gimel Shvilin, the 13 pathways corresponding to Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. And that somehow if you cut off the beard, you're removing all the Rachamei Shamayim. On the other hand, the hair of the head represent Midas Hadin. And therefore it's recommended that you remove the hair of the head. Why? This way you remove the hair of the head, you remove Midas Hadin, and you grow the hair of the beard, you get Midas Harachamim. Obviously the Hasidim take this very literally, and they emphasize this, the concept of the importance of the beard and the importance of lack of hair of the head. And he was asked the following shaila. This Zohar that says you should remove the hair of your head, are you allowed to do it with the scissors? Or maybe you have to use a razor? And the Be'er Asek says, I'm so proud to have such Talmidim who understand the concept and the value of growing the beard and removing the hair of the head. Very proud of my Talmidim. And he throws out this whopper of an idea that in Chutz La'aretz, where you have the Tumas Ha'amim, and you have the impurity of the nations, maybe, you need to remove the beard. Maybe Chutz La'aretz is not roy for a beard. Maybe Chutz La'aretz, it's better not to have a beard. And then he says the following. If you look at number 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 lines from the bottom. Ve'avoy nafshi darashti v'chakarti hetev hadek. I personally investigated very well. Heich hinhug harama MiPano I personally wanted to investigate what was the custom of the Rama Pano. Like, what did he do on Erev Shabbos? How did he get ready for Shabbos? V'adati al nachain, and I know very surely. Ki kol Erev Shabbos havachayif reishay. Every Erev Shabbos he would shampoo his head, not his hair. You know why? The kireach hava. He didn't have hair. He was bald. Umistaper bediknei kiminhaga Italia. And he shaved his beard like the Italian minhag. And if the Rama MiPano, who nobody knew Kabbalah and the Kisei Ari, like the Rama MiPano had a tradition from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, if he shaved his beard, then that is just a clear proof to my concept that even though a beard al pi the Zohar is very important, but not in Chutz La'aretz, a beard is not fit for Chutz La'aretz. Ad kan divrei shaylas teshuvas be'er esek. So, Marv Rabbi Sai, I would like to share with you maybe my favorite tshuva. Okay? And I don't say that lightly. Shaylas teshuvas divrei Yosef. Who wrote the Shaylas teshuvas divrei Yosef? Rav Yosef Irgaz. Rav Yosef Irgaz was a Talmud of Rav Binyamin Cohen. Rav Binyamin Cohen, who's Rav Binyamin Cohen? The father-in-law of Rabbi Yeshaya Bason. Who's Rabbi Yeshaya Bason? The Rebbe of the Ramchal. Rabbi Binyamin Cohen is the father-in-law of Rabbi Yeshaya Bason. He's the Rebbe of Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. Rabbi Yosef Irgaz was one of the chief loichamim, warriors against Nehemiah Chiyun and Shabtai Tzvi. And he was very on guard against false Kabbalists. And very on guard about people who would jump into Kabbalah without knowing Chasam Poskim. Well, he heard about this tshuva of Shas Teshuvas Be'er Esek, who suggests that in Chutz La'aretz it's better not to have a beard. V'haraya, the greatest makubal of all, the Rama MiPano, did not have a beard. Says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, the words of the Shas Teshuvas Be'er Esek is pitpute devarim ein b'hem mamish. It's just chatter. In other words, it's nonsense what the man is spewing. Every word that he says is complete nonsense. Let me tell you something. He himself agreed that he's not familiar with Kabbalah. So it says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, if the Be'er Esek is not familiar with Kabbalah, then where in the world does he come off starting to come up with novelties in Kabbalah? You know what? The Zohar was only talking about Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz, it's not really applicable. It's better not to have a beard. If you don't know the fundamental concept of why a beard is important, then how could you start making differentiations what country you live in? But it says of Yosef Irgaz, let me tell you my main problem over here. Let me tell you something. If the Mekubalim say you should not remove your beard, even with scissors, which they do say, let's not mince words. The Zohar says, don't touch your beard. Are they arguing with the Gemara? The Gemara says, you're not to use a razor, but you can use scissors. So just one simple question. Are the Mekubalim arguing with the Gemara? The Gemara says, the Mekubalim say don't touch your beard, and the Mishnah says you could use scissors. Is there a machlokes over here? Not at all. Chas v'shalom, the Mekubalim would never argue on the Gemara. It says, the Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, one of the most startling things. Anybody who says that if you cut your beard with scissors, you're over alav in the Torah, is a kaifer b'Torah. Is no longer a Jew. Anyone who has the audacity to say, yeah, the Mishnah says you're allowed to, but the Kabbalah says you're not allowed to, and you get an Avera of Baal Tashchis if you cut your beard, is a koifer. Because if you don't believe that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai that you can't use a razor, but you could use scissors, then I don't care whether your pretext is feigned righteousness, you're a koifer in the Torah. You're no longer a Jew. You pick up my bottle of wine, I can't drink it anymore. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu you could use a pair of scissors on your beard. So what do the Mekubala mean? Let me explain something, says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. There's something called Nigla, and there's something called Nistar. Nigla is Shas and Poskim. Who has to keep Shas and Poskim? Every single Jew. We all keep what it says in the Gemara and the Mishnah Berurah. Finished. But the Kabbalah are only for Yechidei Segula. Kabbalah are for great individuals who are on a very high madrega. They could keep saintly practices v'kadosh yamar lai. But nobody would say that someone who violates what it says in the Zayar is an avarian. Chas v'shalom. Let me explain something, says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. My whole life I'm in terrible pain how you have some people, they jump into Kabbalah and they make believe they're big mikubalim. Yeah, what do? They open up some svarim. They open up this sefer, that sefer, and they start talking. Yeah, partsufim, spherois, zachar nekeva, abba ima, rachaleya. Shkayach, rachaleya. I also just said it. They don't know what they're talking about. It's like reading a Chinese newspaper. Says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, you know what we call this? Kishkish, estira, belagina, kishkish karya. Know what that means? You have a pushka, it's packed to the gills. You shake it, it makes no noise. So too, you have somebody who knows halacha, someone who knows Gemara. You don't hear much from him. You know why? Because he has it. He doesn't have to make noise. It's the person who knows like one or two, like, you know, what was it called? Like sound bites from the Zayar and from the Arizal. All of a sudden, you know, he's constantly spewing forth. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know anything. And sometimes people take it so far, they think they know, and they say, oh, the Zayar says like A over here, he says B over here, so they want to be Mechadesh C. And they're Mechadesh things which are Keneged the Torah. Then the Rabbi Yosef Irgaz says, even this concept that in Chutz La'aretz you should have a beard, you should not have a beard. And Eretz Yisrael you should have a beard, doesn't make any sense. What's the difference? Do you sit in a sukkah in Chutz La'aretz? Do you wear tefillin in Chutz La'aretz? Why would a beard be any different? If anything, if there's more tumah in Chutz La'aretz, if anything you should have the beard in Chutz La'aretz. Come to Eretz Yisrael and have a smooth face. Why would it be the opposite? But this is my favorite part. But now says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, he completely rips apart the testimony of the Be'er Asek. Listen very carefully. Says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, with all due respect, Mr. Be'er Asek, Rabbi Be'er Asek, you claim that you investigated the Rami Pano's personal hygiene on Erev Shabbos, and you were told that he's using, an Orelco, that the guy in the buzz on Coney Island took out he dulled the blade. That's what he was doing? It's a masa listar. Your testimony is testimony against yourself. Listen carefully to what you say. You said that you heard that the Rama MiPano was mistaper b'diknei, in his beard. Why didn't whoever told you this say he was mistaper diknei? He shaved his beard. Why did he say he shaved in his beard? You know why? Because he didn't remove his beard. He had a litfisha beard. You know what a litfisha beard? Where I come from, in Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim, litfisha beard is, you have a nice neat line over here, and you have a nice neat line over here, and it's trimmed over here. He doesn't have a chasida. He trimmed his beard. That's what it means. Mistaper bidikne. So you claim he shaved off his beard. Listen to the words that you heard. Mistaper bidikne. That's number one. Number two, I spoke to my Rebbe. Who is his Rebbe? Rabbi Yamin Cohen. And Rabbi Yamin Cohen, my Rebbe, told me that the Be'er Asek is not a reliable sefer. Can't rely on it. And then my Rebbe told me the following. Okay, I'm going to give this out. Don't look at it yet, okay? You can have it, but if on condition you don't look at it. You think you can handle that? I'll let you know when you can look at it. Keep it down, keep it down. Don't open it, don't turn around. Well, Rabbi Yamin Cohen, no, the other way. Rabbi Yamin Cohen told me that he was in Manitoba and he saw a picture of the Rami Pano. Turn it over. Looks like a beard to me. The Rama MiPano in the picture in Manitoba, he certainly had a beard. Not only that, it was mole, it was a flowing beard. And then the Divrei Yosef says, one of the most important things, you will... What? Then the Divrei Yosef says one of the most important things. The Divrei Yosef says like this. If you would have told me that the Rama MiPano gave a shiur, and when somebody asked him about beards, the Rama MiPano said that al pi Kabbalah, you shouldn't have a beard in Chutz La'aretz, then I would say like this. He said it? If he said it, then it must be true. Then I would have said, I don't believe an Adam Gadol would have made such a unusual statement. That's if he would have said. In other words, if the Rama MiPano would have got up in shul and said, I feel that in Chutz La'aretz you shouldn't have a beard, then my reaction, says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, would have been, I would have said, if he said it, then it must be true, but I don't believe he said such a thing. The same way that Rabbi Leon Mizrahi, when he heard that Rabbeinu Tam said something that he didn't understand, he said, I don't believe Rabbeinu Tam would ever say something to him. But you're not saying that the Rama MiPano said it. You're telling me that you investigated and you were told that the Rama MiPano shaved. What is that called? Hearsay. No pun intended. That's called, right? That's called hearsay. Hearsay information is worthless. I heard that a certain gadol did this. Whippy-doo. I don't care. It's meaningless. Hearsay information has no meaning in Torah. Ein lameidin halacha mipi maisa. We do not learn halacha from stories. People tell you, why do you do this? One time I saw a gadol b'Yisrael do this. First of all, I tell the guy, you sure you saw? Or somebody told it to you and you convinced yourself that you saw it? Were you drunk? Were you sick? Were you hallucinating? Were you smoking at the time? Was that a good moment for you? Were you up? Were you dreaming? Maybe you forgot. Maybe you read it and now you think you saw it. A story in halacha has no value. I saw once upon a time. I'll tell you a bigger chiddush. There's a very important thing. The Gemara in Hariya says, if you go to a shiur, and the rabbi in a shiur says, this is the halacha, and you rely on it, and the rabbi was wrong, you are not a shoygig, you're a mezid. A shiur is not halacha l'maisa. Just because, let's say, somebody gives a shiur about fishing, the rabbi says, don't do it. It's not halacha l'maisa. It's a shiur. We're learning a topic. It's not halacha l'maisa. No shiur is halacha l'maisa. From anybody. I don't care who you hear from. Any gadol hadar. You do not rely on it. More than that. You're waiting online. And you hear somebody ask the Rav, I was just wondering, what would the halacha be? And the Rav says mutter. Can't rely on it. Because you told him you're just wondering. So he also he threw out what he thought at the time. He's not required to make sure he does his complete due diligence. The only time you could rely on something, you tell a Rav, I have a shaila that's nagei on me right now, what should I do? You ask her, theoretically, what would be? That's why many of the Sofer that are written today, are questions somebody asked the gadol while they were walking. It's very interesting, but it doesn't carry the weight of halacha l'maisa. You can't rely on it. It means something, but says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, you heard that the Rama MiPano? Who cares? We don't rely on stories. Maybe the guy who saw wrong. Maybe he said it over wrong. He said another thing. Maybe the Rama MiPano was sick. And he had a disease, and that's why he had to shave his beard. But if you would ask him what to do, you would say, Avada, you have to have a beard. You can never bring a raya, I saw this gadol doing this. Maybe he had mitigating circumstances, extenuating circumstances. You can only rely. You ask, I want to know what should I do, and he tells you what to do. Certainly, a shiur is a good indication, a good starting point. But if you have a serious question, say, what should I do? Let me check up on Torah anytime if somebody has a good shiur on the subject. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Torah anytime. But you look at the Mishnah Berurah, you have to ask a shaila. But these type of anecdotal evidence is only anecdotal evidence. And therefore, says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, there's no way in a million years that Rami Pano did not have a beard. It's just not possible. We have a picture. I spoke to my Rebbe. My Rebbe said that the Be'er Isaac is not reliable. He himself didn't say that Rami Pano shaved it. He shaved in it. But interestingly, the Chasam Sofer does quote that the Italian Gedolim did not have beards, which is certainly true. Most Italian Gedolim did not have beards. We do know whether the Rami Pano had a beard or not. Many Gedolim we know, Rav Shamson and Porgo, and others were clean-shaven. And they were very great tzaddikim, and they were very great chasidim, and they were very great kadoshim, and there was nothing lacking in their avodas Hashem. Well, comes the Minchas Elazar, and if you know the Minchas Elazar, Munkach, the concept that the Rami Pano did not have a beard did not sit well with him. Even though the Minchas Elazar would be the last to ever disagree with the Chasam Sofer, but this is where he draws the line. Chasam Sofer says that the Rami Pano didn't have a beard. So the Minchas Elazar says like this. The Minchas Elazar says that the Chasam Sofer, who does he quote that says the Rami Pano didn't have a beard? Chasam Sofer didn't quote Shas Tshuvas Be'er Esek. He quoted Yashar Mikandaya in the Sefer Elam. Says the Minchas Elazar, I checked over there. He doesn't say that Rami Pano didn't have a beard. It says that he didn't have a beard. Yashar Mikandaya didn't have a beard, and of course he didn't. He was very involved with the governors, with the officers. He was politically very active, and he couldn't have a beard. So where exactly did the Chasam Sofer get that the Rami Pano didn't have a beard? He must have remembered it from the Be'er Esek, and somehow there was a little bit of an error, and it was attributed to the Yashar Mikandaya. Says the Minchas Elazar, the Chasam Sofer probably never saw the tshuva of Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. If he would have seen the tshuva of Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, Rabbi Yosef Irgaz says the Be'er Esek is not reliable, and that the whole testimony of Rami Pano is not that he shaved off his beard, but he shaved in his beard, and that Rabbi Yamin Cohen said that he saw a picture of Rami Pano and he had a beard, the Chasam Sofer would have been chayzar. Now this is where the Minchas Elazar takes it to another level. And the Minchas Elazar writes his personal opinion is as follows. When the Mishnah and take a look at number 14 and we'll close with this. The Mishnah Masechta Makos says that someone who cuts off the payas of his beard. By the way, I want to tell you a very important halacha. Halachically, by the end of the day, you're allowed to use a scissor, and if you have an acceptable shaver, you can use an acceptable shaver. But Moshe Paskins, you're allowed to use it. But you should know, that's the beard. The payas harosh, even with the scissor, you can't cut them extremely close to the face. They have to be at least long enough, a certain length. Long enough to grab, long enough to bend over. Some people like to have a certain hairstyle. They like very sharp sideburns. So while a shaver, which is an acceptable shaver, Rav Moshe says is mutter on the face, you have to be careful in the area of the payas not to shave the sideburns too close. Where does this come from? How do we know you're allowed to use scissors on the face? It's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Einoi chayev, look at number 14, ad sheyitlenu batar. You're not chayev until you shave it with a razor. What is that mashma? That with scissors, it's permitted. Well, the Minchas Elazar has a different way of reading the Mishnah. You're only chayev malchus if you use a razor. But if you use scissors, you still get a lav of loisashches. And he quotes, there are many who say that, you should know. The Masir Rokeach says that. The Sefer HaChinuch seems to say that. And the Minchas Elazar says that. According to the Minchas Elazar, merely touching the beard is a problem. However, it don't really matter. Because the Beis Yosef says very clearly, we don't paskin that way. The Beis Yosef writes that we paskin, you read the Mishnah, you can't use a razor, but you're allowed to use scissors. And therefore, we conclude as follows. You want to know, did the Rami Pano have a beard? Chasam Sofer says no. In all likelihood, Rami Pano probably had a beard something like this. There's an article written in the early 1900s, a journal called Ma'asef, where he brings that the tzaddik from Kamarna was in a museum in Wien, and he saw another picture of Rami Pano where he had a beard. So in all likelihood, Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, who had a tradition from his Rabbi Yamin Cohen, in all likelihood, it's very reasonable. Rami Pano, unlike every other Italian gadol, he himself probably did. But halacha l'maisa, it's not really an issue, despite kvoido shel minchas alazar b'makom emunach, and he's not the only one. But nevertheless, we have something called Shulchan Aruch, and the Beis Yosef writes that the reading of the Mishnah is that you're not allowed to use a razor on the face, but scissors are mutter, and therefore our approach is like the Chasam Sofer. This we know for sure, that anybody who says there's an avera to remove the hair of the face, asad litei nasadin, that person's going to face the consequences. Why? Because we have a Messiah, we have Torah Shabbat Peh. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, according to the normative halacha, the Beis Yosef, it's permitted. Is there an Inyan al pi Kabbalah? Yes. But like the Rabbi Yosef Irgaz says, the Kabbalah is for Yechidei Segula. But for somebody to say to somebody else, you have a Chiyuv, or it's an Aveira, or it's a Chet Kal, or it's a small Chet, not a small Chet. Says the Chasam Sofer, he writes the following words: the custom of Klal Yisrael going back to the Gzeres of Tatnu is not mimakar moshchos. It's not from a corrupt source. The Chasam Sofer says, B'kedosham Yisera, it has holiness as well. And therefore, there have been many great people throughout our history who are tzaddikim, who are chasidim, and the fact that they didn't have a beard did not diminish from their gadlus. But al pi Kabbalah, there is such a concept, and so now we're in the 3 weeks where the minog is, at least now, starting tomorrow for sure, minog Ashkenaz, and certainly Shavuot Shechal by Tisha B'Av, and one should try their best during the week of Tisha B'Av itself. This year it's not clear whether there is a Shavuot Shechal by Tisha B'Av because it's pushed off to Sunday. But if you do end up having, the hair, so at least 1 week a year, or 3 weeks a year, you mekayim this inyan. But where I come from, the chitzonios and the external trappings, as we say, are always helpful, but the not to let a person get carried away with it, because the ikar is, like the Rabbi Yosef Irgaz writes, the ikar is the halacha, the Gemara, the poskim, which is incumbent upon every Jew. And above and beyond that, that's for Yechidei Skula, V'Kadash Yamarlai. Have a wonderful evening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.